There's something powerful about choosing silence when everything in you wants to speak. When your dignity feels bruised, when your name is being tossed around without care, when the heat of disrespect rises so high that your throat tightens with words you know you could use to burn it all down, choosing silence feels like surrender. It feels like weakness. It feels like being walked over. But let me tell you something that took me years to learn and moments to understand. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a sacred weapon. See, we've been trained to clap back. We've been conditioned to protect our image, defend our truth, and guard our name. And there's nothing wrong with having a voice, but there's a difference between using your voice and being driven by your ego. There's a difference between standing in truth and stepping into chaos. Some battles don't need your sword. They need your surrender. They need your silence, not because you're scared, not because you're ignoring the pain, but because you know there's a God who speaks clearer than any argument, who vindicates better than any comeback, who restores without your words needing to pave the way. Some of you have been fighting to be heard in places where your silence would have said more. You've used your energy trying to explain yourself to people who were never meant to understand your journey. You've lost sleep crafting the perfect response to people who don't even have the capacity to carry the weight of your truth. But silence tells them you know something greater. Silence tells them you don't need to win every conversation to walk in your calling. I used to think silence was for the timid, that only those without courage chose to stay quiet, but now I know silence is for the healed. Silence is for the ones who know their identity isn't up for debate. It's for those who don't need to prove they've changed, because their fruit speaks louder than their words ever could. It's for the women who have cried enough tears, warred enough wars, and finally learned that peace is more valuable than being right. Let me tell you about silence in the presence of disrespect. That's the hardest kind. When someone slanders you, belittles you, disrespects the version of you they built in their own mind, and you want to step into that fire and say, "Let me correct this real quick." But something in your spirit says, "No, stay still, stay silent." And it's not silence rooted in fear. It's silence rooted in discernment. It's the silence that trusts God to speak where your voice might only stir more noise. It's the kind of silence that says, "I'm not going to let their chaos pull me out of character." Because here's the truth, silence isn't passive, it's prophetic. It's an act of war against every spirit that wants you to react instead of rise. It's standing in the middle of the storm with your mouth shut and your heart open, saying, "God, I trust you to fight this one." And you'll be surprised how many times God will say more in your silence than you ever could in your shouting. Silence doesn't mean you don't feel the sting. It doesn't mean you weren't hurt. It means you've learned that not every moment requires your voice to prove your value. You can be silent and still be strong. You can be silent and still be seen. You can be silent and still be chosen. Sometimes the greatest proof of your growth is your restraint, your decision to let God speak when you have every reason to say something. And when God speaks, when He moves in the gaps where your silence held the space, oh, it's undeniable. He doesn't just clear your name, He elevates it. He doesn't just restore your peace, He multiplies it. He doesn't just end the battle, He transforms it into a testimony, and all because you were willing to keep your mouth closed and your faith open. So if you're in a season where you're being tempted to shout, to scream, to make your pain known, pause. Breathe, remember, silence is not the absence of strength, it's the evidence of it. Let your quiet be your confidence. Let your stillness be your strategy. Let your silence speak volumes, and when you stay silent, don't think you're alone. Because heaven is speaking on your behalf. There's a reason why God doesn't always show up loud. A reason why he doesn't always crash through the doors of our problems with thunder and lightning and fire. Because sometimes he waits. He waits until we're quiet enough to hear him. He waits until we're done venting, done panicking, done reacting. He waits until we run out of our own words, until we're finally still enough for his whisper to reach us. And in that silence, in that holy pause, he speaks. I used to think that God's presence had to come with fireworks. I thought if he was really moving, it would shake the room, people would notice, doors would swing open, chains would fall off, and everything would shift in a dramatic way. But now I know that more often than not, God moves in quiet spaces. He doesn't always make noise, he makes meaning. He makes change, and if we're not still enough, we'll miss it. Some of the greatest miracles don't happen in a crowd. They happen in the dark. In those nights when your pillow is soaked with tears you haven't told anyone about. In those moments when you're sitting in the car, hands gripping the steering wheel, whispering, God, I can't do this anymore. That's where he moves. Not always with a booming voice, but with a quiet knowing, a presence you can't explain but can't deny either. A peace that presses down on you like a blanket and says, I'm here, I never left, but we have to be willing to quiet the noise. And let me tell you, there is so much noise, the noise of our thoughts racing with anxiety, the noise of comparison scrolling past our screens. The noise of opinions, expectations, disappointments, regrets. We are constantly surrounded by voices, and sometimes the loudest one is our own. The one that doubts, questions, overthinks, criticizes, and God, in his wisdom, won't shout over it. He waits for us to quiet the storm so we can hear the Savior. That's why silence is so sacred. It's not just the absence of sound, it's the posture of listening. It's the discipline of saying, I don't need to have all the answers right now. I just need to be still. Still doesn't mean stuck. Still doesn't mean powerless. Still means surrendered. Still means open. And when you get still enough, you realize God was never silent. You were just too loud. Some of the most transformative moments in my life didn't come from a sermon or a song. They came from silence. From a moment of being completely undone in his presence, no music, no words, just him and me and all the unspoken things laid bare before a God who didn't need me to explain. And in that quiet, he began to speak, not with solutions, but with security, not with timelines, but with trust. And sometimes that's all I needed, not answers, just the assurance that he saw me. I believe some of us have been crying out, begging God to speak, when really he's waiting for us to listen. Waiting for us to turn down the volume on our fears, our frustration, and our pride, because the truth is, God doesn't force his way in. He meets us in the spaces we make room for him. And if we never slow down, if we never sit still, if we never choose silence, we may miss the voice that calms the storm. So many people are chasing noise, chasing applause, chasing clarity in all the wrong places. But the clarity you're looking for won't always come from a platform or a prophet. Sometimes it comes in the stillness, in the quiet nudge that says, you're doing better than you think, in the gentle conviction that corrects without crushing, in the whisper that tells you you're not alone, I'm guiding this even if you can't see it. So don't be afraid of the silence. Don't rush to fill it. Don't mistake it for absence. Silence is the soil where revelation takes root. It's where God downloads vision that noise would have distorted. It's where healing happens without distraction. Where strength is rebuilt not with hype, but with hope. Real, anchored, eternal hope. If you've been waiting on God to speak, maybe it's your turn to get quiet. Because he's not hiding, he's waiting. Waiting for the moment when the noise dies down and your heart leans in. That's when he speaks, and when he does, it changes everything. There's something sacred about knowing you don't have to defend yourself. Knowing that your silence doesn't mean you're weak, That just because you didn't clap back, just because you didn't clear the room with your voice, it doesn't mean you're defeated. It actually means the opposite. It means you've matured. It means you've learned that your identity doesn't hang in the balance of other people's misunderstanding. It means you've reached a place where peace matters more than being proven right, because real strength is choosing not to waste your energy explaining your growth to people who are committed to seeing you through the lens of your past. There was a time when being quiet made me feel small, when being silent made me feel like I was being overlooked, dismissed, erased. But over time I realized that there is a strength in silence that loudness can never carry, a power in not reacting. Because anyone can react, but it takes restraint to pause. It takes wisdom to stay silent when you know you have the words to destroy someone's entire narrative, but you also know that doing so would cost you your peace. And you've come too far to trade your peace for a moment of pride. You start to understand that silence is not the absence of power. It's the presence of trust. It's trusting that you don't have to be loud to be seen. You don't have to argue to be valid. You don't have to constantly correct people to know that your worth is still intact. When you finally understand who you are, you stop trying to convince people of it. You let your life speak. You let your healing speak. You let your peace speak. And believe me, they speak louder than words ever could. The enemy wants you to believe that silence makes you invisible, that if you don't speak up in every moment, you're being run over. But sometimes silence is you rising above it. It's you choosing not to shrink into their drama. It's you keeping your dignity while others throw theirs around like weapons. It's you saying, I could, but I won't. Because God has taught you to pick your battles, and not everything deserves your voice. Not every situation deserves your reaction. Not every person deserves access to your energy. You can be silent and still be powerful. In fact, some of the most powerful people I've ever encountered were quiet in spirit but bold in faith. They didn't need to make noise, they carried presence. They didn't need to correct every lie, they let time and God do the revealing. And that's what I want to be, someone who can hold my peace even when I'm misunderstood. Someone who can trust God to defend me even when I'm being disrespected. Someone who doesn't shrink but also doesn't swing at everything that moves, because let's be honest, we've all had those moments. Moments when your name is in rooms your feet haven't even entered yet. Moments when people are building stories about you based on assumptions, gossip, old wounds they never healed. And everything in you wants to storm in and say, let me tell you who I really am. But then God reminds you, you don't owe everyone that explanation. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you. Some people want a reaction, not a resolution, and you've grown enough to know the difference. There's a weight that lifts off your shoulders when you stop feeling responsible for everyone's perception of you. When you realize that staying silent doesn't make you small, it makes you strong. That you don't have to jump into the fire to prove you're not afraid. You can walk around it, you can stand still, you can let the flames die down on their own, knowing that what's meant for you cannot be burned up in someone else's opinion. You are not what they say you are. You are not the rumors. You are not the version they built out of their own insecurity. You are not your past. You are not even the person you were yesterday. You are becoming, and becoming takes focus. Becoming takes silence. Becoming takes strength. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is close your mouth. Keep your peace, and let God keep building the woman they still don't understand. So don't confuse silence with weakness. Silence is strategy. Silence is discipline. Silence is strength. And when the time is right, when the season shifts, and when your purpose steps into the room, you won't have to raise your voice. God will have already spoken on your behalf. There comes a time in your life when you have to stop trying to explain yourself. When you realize that proving your truth to people who only want to rewrite your story will never lead to peace. That moment, that holy, quiet moment, is when you choose to stay silent and let God speak. Because when your name is being dragged into conversations you were never invited to, when your character is under review by people who never knew your heart in the first place, there's nothing louder than your silence backed by God's authority. We all crave to be understood. We want people to know the weight we carry, the growth we've fought for, the healing we've crawled through. Well, not twisted into someone I is not else's, sure what I am able to be our busk, OKENNESS. But the truth is, sometimes your story gets handed to people who have no business holding it. People who speak on your name with confidence but no clarity. And in those moments when you're tempted to defend every detail, there's something stronger than explanation: silence. Because silence gives God the room to reclaim the narrative. You don't have to chase lies when you know who's writing your story. When you're deeply anchored in the author of your purpose, you realize that not everyone deserves an update on your transformation. God saw the chapters they skipped. He saw the nights you cried when no one knew. He saw the decisions you made when you could have taken revenge but chose healing instead. And if God saw it, then that's enough. That's all the validation you'll ever need. Because people might get the story wrong, but God always gets the ending right. Let them talk, let them question, let them assume, let them debate versions of you that don't even exist anymore. Because every minute you spend trying to fix their view of you is a minute stolen from your assignment. And your assignment is far too costly to be delayed by distractions. They may have distorted the truth, but your silence hands the pen back to God. It says, write this next part how you want it, Lord. You speak for me. You be my vindication. You be the voice behind the scenes. God is not interested in signing your need to be validated by man. He's interested in building something through you that doesn't require their approval to stand. He's interested in elevating you in rooms where your name was previously misused, and doing it in such a way that even your enemies can't deny the shift. But that only happens when you step back, when you stop interrupting the divine process with your desire to be understood. Sometimes God can't fully speak because you're still talking, still defending, still explaining, still trying to correct what He's already covered. What if the reason you haven't seen the full breakthrough yet is because you're still standing in the courtroom trying to prove a case God already closed? What if heaven is waiting on you to be still so it can move forward with a verdict? Because God doesn't just defend you, He reclaims the entire story. He takes what they misused and turns it into ministry. He takes what they misunderstood and turns it into momentum. He takes the very thing they thought would disqualify you and makes it the proof of your calling. The next time you hear your name in places it doesn't belong, remember this: God's voice will always outlast the noise. Always the rumors will die down, the lies will fall flat, the opinions will shift like sand, but what God has spoken over you, that stands. And when you know that, when you really believe that, you stop chasing clarity from people who can't even hear Him. You stop trying to rewrite the story they twisted. You let God speak, because when He speaks, He settles. He restores, He reveals, and He does it without you having to utter a single word. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is go silent and go forward. Let them wonder. Let them sit in confusion. Let them be shocked when grace carries you places gossip said you'd never reach. Let your growth be the only announcement you make. Let your peace be the only statement you give, because when God reclaims the narrative, He doesn't just vindicate you, He elevates you. And no voice in the world can cancel what He has already confirmed. So when the weight of being misunderstood starts to crush you, remember, you were never created to be understood by everyone. You were created to be covered by Him. Let that be enough. Let that be your freedom. Let that be your silence. Let that be the moment you step back and let God speak. There's something in us that wants to fix everything. Something that rises up when we feel disrespected, dismissed, or dishonored. That voice inside that says, no, I need to speak on this. I need to make this right. I need to let them know they've crossed the line. But not every battle you face is yours to fight. And not every fight requires your voice. Sometimes the most powerful position you can take is one of surrender, not because you're weak, but because you've learned which battles belong to you and which ones are better left in God's hands. It takes growth to walk away from what you used to run toward, to recognize the difference between standing up for yourself and stepping into a storm you were never called to calm. We've been conditioned to believe that silence is losing, that if you don't speak up, you're letting people get away with something. But there's a difference between silence that's rooted in fear and silence that's rooted in wisdom. And wisdom will tell you, this fight, it's not worth your voice. This conflict, it's not worthy of your energy. This battle, it's not even about you. Some of the things you're tempted to react to aren't even spiritual attacks, they're distractions. Sent to pull you out of character, sent to detour your focus, sent to provoke a version of you that healing has already outgrown. And the enemy loves it when you forget who you are and start swinging at every word, every whisper, every wound. Because as long as you're swinging, you're not building. As long as you're shouting, you're not listening. As long as you're fighting battles God didn't assign you, you're not walking in the victory He already prepared for you. There's strength in choosing stillness. Not the kind of stillness that comes from resignation, but the kind that comes from revelation. The revelation that your value doesn't come from being heard in every argument. The revelation that your voice is too anointed to be wasted on petty situations. The revelation that if the enemy can't take your calling, he'll try to wear you out with conflict. But you've got to decide, will you react or will you rest? Will you prove a point or will you protect your peace? There's a peace that comes when you let God handle it. A deep, anchoring peace that whispers, you don't have to fix this. You don't have to respond to this. You don't even have to defend yourself. Because God knows the truth. God sees the motives. God hears what was said behind closed doors. And the same God who saw Joseph in the pit, the same God who saw Esther in the palace, the same God who saw Daniel in the lion's den, He sees you. And He's not silent about your pain. He's strategic with it. Sometimes the battle isn't yours because it's beneath you. Not because you're better, but because you're further. You've outgrown the need to be loud in every space. You've matured beyond the urge to be right all the time. You've developed a discernment that recognizes when the enemy is baiting you into a war that has nothing to do with your purpose. And now you know better. Now you protect your voice like the weapon it is. Now you speak only when God says speak. And when He says be still, you stay silent without shame. You weren't called to fight everything. You weren't built to carry every battle. Some battles are spiritual, and your silence is your warfare. Some battles are invisible, and your surrender is your strategy. Some battles are already won, and all you've got to do is not lose your composure while the victory unfolds. It takes real strength to sit down when you could stand up and speak. It takes real courage to let go when you have every reason to fight back. But when you know God is your defender, you don't have to play lawyer in a courtroom you were never summoned to. You've been carrying too much, trying to protect your reputation, your family, your peace, your purpose, and somewhere along the way, you forgot that God fights for you. That He goes before you, that He covers what you can't see and silences what you'll never hear, and when you remember that, you stop chasing battles that don't belong to you. You stop talking to prove your worth. You stop running toward every fire thinking it's your job to put it out. You start walking in wisdom, in silence, in faith. Not every battle requires your voice. Some of them just require your trust. Let God handle what your words can't. Let Him move in ways your presence might disrupt. Let Him be the one who speaks while you stay anchored in the strength of your stillness. Because the victory you're looking for is already written, you just need to be quiet enough to watch it unfold. Sometimes we're not afraid of silence, we're afraid of what we might hear in it. We fill our days with noise, surround ourselves with distractions, stay busy convincing ourselves that movement is progress. But deep down we know the truth. We're scared of quiet because quiet exposes things. It exposes the wounds we've buried, the fears we've silenced, the truths we've tried to avoid. But if you never get quiet, you'll never get clarity. You'll never hear the voice that matters most. Because when the noise finally dies down, when the crowd fades and the spotlight dims, that's when God begins to speak. That's when you start to hear what truly matters. There's a difference between silence and stillness. The world will tell you silence is empty, that stillness is lazy, but in God's presence, silence is full. Stillness is sacred. Because in the silence, you start to feel things you've numbed for too long. You start to realize just how much noise you've tolerated, how many voices have shaped your self-worth, how many opinions have clouded your vision, how many lies you've started to believe just because they were loud. But volume doesn't equal truth. Just because it's loud doesn't mean it's right. And just because it's silent doesn't mean God isn't moving. Some of us have been begging God for answers, but we haven't given Him a moment of quiet. We've shouted our prayers but haven't stayed long enough to hear His whisper. We've looked for confirmation in people, in posts, in places, everywhere but His presence. And He's saying, I'm not in the noise, I'm in the stillness, I'm not in the chaos, I'm in the calm. Turn everything down so you can hear me. Because the break through you're waiting on may not come through a booming voice or a sudden shift. It might come in a whisper that tells you, you're already enough. I've already gone before you. You don't have to fix it all. But you won't hear that in the noise. You won't feel that peace if you never make room for it. It's in the silence that your spirit starts to breathe again. It's in the quiet that your heart begins to process what your mouth couldn't say. It's in the stillness that God starts revealing things about you, about your situation, about your next step. But He won't shout over your distractions. He waits for you to clear the space. He waits for you to choose Him over the noise. That kind of quiet takes courage. It takes maturity to silence the world so you can hear heaven, because silence makes space for conviction. It makes space for truth. It makes space for healing, and healing doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes it hurts to hear the truth about yourself, to realize you've been holding on to things that were never yours, fighting battles that weren't your assignment, trying to be strong in ways that were never sustainable. But God doesn't expose to embarrass. He exposes to rebuild, and He'll never reveal something in the silence that He isn't ready to heal in His love. The noise can't give you that kind of restoration. People can't offer that kind of clarity. Validation doesn't come from volume. It comes from being rooted in the voice of God. And once you've heard Him speak into your quiet, once you've felt Him move in your stillness, you stop looking for confirmation in the chaos. You stop begging for clarity from people who can't see your purpose. You stop explaining your journey to people who were never assigned to understand it. You find your peace in the pause. You find your confidence in the calm. That's where your discernment grows. That's where your wisdom sharpens. When you shut out the noise, you begin to hear not just what's around you, but what's inside of you. You start to recognize what's God and what's just your fear talking. You start to tell the difference between divine direction and emotional reaction. You begin to see how many times you moved because the world was loud, not because God was clear. So if the world is noisy right now, if you feel overwhelmed, unsure, or unseen, get quiet. Not just with your mouth, but with your heart. Quiet the part of you that always feels the need to be in control. Quiet the part of you that's still trying to prove something. Quiet the part of you that's afraid to hear what God really wants to say, because what he has to say is rooted in love, and it's what you've been longing for all along. When the noise dies down, that's when you remember who you are. That's when you remember whose you are. And that's when you realize you never needed to be loud to be led. You just needed to be still enough to hear.